So now we're going to find out why it's important to find the marginal productivity in relation to social circulating capital, and how we form the discount rate. So over to Professor.
Thank you. I go back to the last idea which we mentioned just in the morning. We talked about arbitrage. The marginal shopkeeper is the arbitrageur in a rather special type of arbitrage. It may be surprising to many who haven't studied this particular economic problem, which is supplying the consumer with the consumer goods in the highest demand. These are parts of the social circuiting capital are precisely those consumer goods which are most urgently demanded by the consumer goods in the highest demand. So there's a market for those. And then there is the bill market. So we are going to see now how the marginal shopkeeper does this particular arbitrage. Recall the definition of the marginal shopkeeper. He is the first among the shopkeepers who is going to adjust his inventory when he notices any change in consumer demand. If it's a change in the positive sense, he detects a greater demand on the part of the consumer, then he's going to expand his inventory on the shelves. And if he detects a contraction in the demand, then he's going to eliminate the marginal item from his shelf. Maybe several marginal items. So there will be a new marginal item which represents a higher productivity. So the variation between the propensity to consume on the one hand and the marginal productivity of social circuiting capital is inverse. Lower demand means higher productivity. I repeat that because this is where most students either don't follow, or if they follow, they forget it and then they don't remember this relationship. But if the propensity to consume falls off, then some items, the marginal items, are eliminated from the shelf. And another item takes over, and that item has a higher productivity. So that's why the relationship is inverse. Of course, the opposite case, if the propensity to consume is increasing. So the marginal shopkeeper is the one who is going to make the adjustment first when the consumer demand changes, when propensity of consume does change. And what he does, he has so much capital to work with. Now, normally, his capital is invested in the consumer goods in the highest demand. That's what he carries on the shelves. However, if consumer demand falls off, contracts, then he is eliminating some of the marginal items. Now, eliminating means that he is not going to reorder them from his supplier. And therefore, he is no longer using his capital to the fullest. So what is he going to do with the spare cash or the extra capital he cannot use in his business because of the lower consumer demand. Well, that's the beauty of the theory, that he's going to redeploy his capital in another market, and that's the bill market. The bill market where the real bills of those shopkeepers are being traded who have a higher productivity and they are still active. So their bills are trading, are circulating in that bill market. So the shopkeeper will send his spare cash to the bill market and he's bidding for the bills. Now what happens when bids come in to a market? It means that the price is going to rise. Now, as the price of the bill rises, this means that the discount rate falls. So, what happens is that as the consumer demand contracts, the marginal shopkeeper is redeploying his capital because he shifts his spare capital, no longer needed in keeping that large inventory, and he will buy the bills. And in buying those bills, the discount rate will fall. Now, this is I would consider this as a very beautiful piece of theory because it shows the efficiency. The marginal shopkeeper is not being punished by the competition, he's being helped because rather than keeping his cash idle, he will buy the bills of those competitors who are more fortunate and they can generate this return which he could no longer generate. His productivity falls off, but his competitors still in business, and he will benefit by it. The marginal shopkeeper benefits by it. And then, of course, when the case is just the opposite, which means that consumer demand picks up, then the marginal shopkeeper realizes that he can fill the empty shelf space. So he's going to reorder. Well, we have discussed this already, but the point is that he has the cash or the capital, because this bill market is the most liquid market there is, so there's no problem for him to sell the bills, and then he has the ready cash. He orders the supplier to provide him with the goods, which will be the new marginal items on his shelf. And when he is adding these new marginal items to the display of goods on his shelf, he is putting a lower productivity good there, which will become the new marginal item, and that means a fall in the marginal productivity of the social circulating capital. So this is an arbitrage between the consumer goods market, those consumer goods which are in the highest demand, and the bill market, which is the market for real bills drawn on those consumer goods. and this has a regulating effect on the market. It's always the ideal amount of goods or the ideal amount of cash. And if there's any need for adjustment, then just through the arbitrage activities of the marginal shopkeeper, the right balance will be struck. So, and the discount rate, what happens to the discount rate? Well, I just said that the marginal shopkeeper is going to liquidate some of his holdings of bills of other shopkeepers, which means selling bills. But selling bills lowers the bill price, and as you lower the bill price, the discount rate will increase. So this interplay exists between the discount rate and the marginal productivity of social circulating capital. So could we sum it up? If the marginal productivity of social circulating capital falls, discount rate rises. Is that what he said? Yeah. And vice versa. When the marginal productivity of social circulating capital rises, the discount rate falls. Well, I have to double check that because, okay, so here it is, you are looking at lecture 16, the notes for 15 are not yet distributed, hopefully tomorrow I will have it ready. Lecture 16, the formation of the discount rate. The discount rate is a signaling system. Any change in the discount rate will alert shopkeepers, all of them, but especially the marginal shopkeeper, that the coordination between the propensity to consume and the marginal productivity, social circulating capital has become necessary. And now this sentence, which is printed in italics, because this is very important, it summarizes this rather complex process, the arbitrage between the two markets. So I'm reading it. The discount rate is determined by the rate of marginal productivity of social circulating capital. This is just the rate at which the opportunity cost of carrying the marginal item on the shelf becomes critical to the marginal shopkeeper. He is the first one among the shopkeepers to eliminate the marginal item from the shelf at the next uptick in the discount rate. Uptick means that the discount rate is rising and it jumps from one lower level to a higher level. When this happens, the marginal shopkeeper will eliminate some items. Conversely, when the downtick occurs in the discount rate, then the marginal shopkeeper will put new items on the shelf which so far haven't been displayed. So there is a new marginal item. And he does this in view of his opportunity to carry his portfolio of bills drawn on other shopkeepers against faster moving merchandise rather than carrying slow moving items on his shelves. So in a condensed form we describe this arbitrage in these words. I admit that this is something you have to think over again and again before it becomes very meaningful to you. We have reached the stage where we can discuss some complex market action, but I think you will see that this has very important consequences that shows how society takes care of various shifting needs. It's not easy because, there is always an aspect of this that you have to do this most efficiently. People, human beings, and society have a limited amount of goods at their disposal, and they have to be deployed in the most efficient manner in order to derive maximum benefits. And it's not always easy to understand how this maximum benefit can be found, how the market reaches that particular adjusting coordination, that the limited resources are distributed and deployed in the most economic and most useful fashion. Now, the short version of this is a theorem, what I've just read, what is printed in italics, and there is a short version of this theorem, which is that the discount rate is in fact identical with the rate of marginal productivity of social circulating capital. And why is that? Because every time one of the two, discount rate on the one hand and the marginal productivity of social circulating capital changes, there is this arbitrage by the marginal shopkeeper which will make this adjustment. If marginal productivity of social circulating capital falls, then he is seeking compensation by reducing stock. This means his capital is no longer fully deployed, he has excess cash, takes this cash to the bill market, buys the bills, that means bidding up the price, which means falling. So I have to correct myself. Just before we went through this, and I made the conclusion they move in the opposite direction. This is not correct. They move in the same. So I hope I haven't confused you too badly, but in order to rectify this, let's now look at the other situation when the consumer demand picks up and the marginal shopkeeper will be in the position to fill the empty shelf space. How does he do that? He does this by ordering a new marginal item. And in order to pay for this, he will liquidate some of his bills in portfolio. And that means selling the bills, which means that the price of the bill goes down, which which means that the discount rate goes up.
You were right.
I confused myself, which is much better than if I'm confused. But you could start in the other direction. You assume that there's a change in the bill market. And if there's a change in the bill market, then it has a consequence. And the consequence is that the adjustment will be made by the marginal shopkeeper. So, for example, if the discount rate goes up, that is a message to the shopkeeper that his earnings in the bill market went higher. So it will beat the marginal of the productivity, the marginal item on his shelf. So because he's enticed to the higher earning, he will do the liquidation. He will no longer order the saving he will channel into the bill market. So it's a two-way street. Signal could come from the discount rate on the bill market, but it could also come immediately from the consumer who doesn't buy or wants to buy other things, and that he will it will induce him to do the appropriate arbitrage. So this is how it works, and it's I'm sorry, I'm just very excited about this. It's a very beautiful theory, and I'm very glad that I had a little part in developing this. It hasn't caught on, but I hope it will, and the fact that you are here is a proof that my voice is not in the wilderness. I'm not crying in the wilderness, because there is a little, to me, very meaningful response, and we shall see what the benefit. It's not empty theorizing. There will be some important consequences. Now, what I hadn't really discussed in a great deal of detail so far is how the discount rate comes about originally. How did it happen that the real bill market created that situation whereby there's a return to capital in the form of a discount rate. So let's talk about this a little bit. Let's put the marginal shopkeeper to rest for a little while we clarify the process whereby the bill market makes it possible for those who purchase the bills earn a return. And I already called that the return the safest return you can earn having paper assets. It's the best earning. I think I use this phrase. The bills are the best earning assets which a commercial bank can have. They are liquid, they are safe, and they have all the other features which you find desirable if you want to be both liquid and safe in putting your reserves in. And that's exactly what the commercial banker is looking for. He wants to have an earning asset which is very liquid, because he might have to meet a demand for gold, and if this is a higher demand than the normal, then the only way he can meet it is to sell some of his bills from portfolio for gold, and then use the gold to satisfy that increased gold demand. So it has to be very liquid, and certainly the bill market offers that liquidity, and it has to be very safe. We have seen that in the bond market there can be crises. If too many people try to sell bonds, then the bond price could collapse without active. And this is not a fault of the issuer of the bond, because it could be the fault of the acceptance house, which insists on collateral for accepting bills, and if all the acceptance houses try to sell bonds at the same time, then the bids disappear and the price of the bond falls. And that's not because of the issuer of the bond, because the bond may be maturing in several years from now. But this could happen, and therefore bond investment is not a safe one, in that sense that when you want to liquidate your holdings, the market may not be there. There are no bids, and therefore you take a loss. This is not the case in the bill market. The bill market, there is a steady demand for bills world over, and because of that, the bank or whoever is holding the bill will be in the position to liquidate his bill without any loss or any major loss, let's put it that way. There are transaction costs, but the type of loss we are talking about is in the bond market or the stock market or real estate market. So what I'm visualizing now is a situation that there are these traders, and we can think of the example from Mises, that's not human action, that's the theory of money and capital. He describes the nexus between the spinner and the weaver and the cloth merchant. Okay, they are trading, they are producing, and the semi-finished good is moving closer and closer to the consumer. It's the cloth merchant who is closest to the consumer, and the bills are drawn on his good, on him, because the cloth is delivered to the cloth merchant, and he will then sell it to the ultimate consumer. So this bill is acceptable to the spinner who is spinning the yarn, of which the weaver weaves the cloth, and at maturity in 91 days or less, the spinner also has his supplier. If it's cotton, well, then the cotton merchant is also part of the chain, and the bill goes through his hands as well. But at maturity, they collect from the cloth merchant, who is the one who gets the gold coin at the time the final sale is made, and then all the demands which have arisen during the journey of the semi-finished good to the consumer, all the demands, the credit at every level, let's suppose there are 4 levels, will be satisfied out of the single gold coin, which is collected by the cloth merchant, and then when he pays the bill, then everybody gets his share. Okay, so this is the situation, and now let's take into account the discount rate. We have already mentioned that a bill which is still maturing would circulate, but when it changes hands, for example, when the weaver passes it on to the spinner, the face value of the bill is subject to discount, and the amount of discount mainly depends on the number of days to maturity. And it has to be annualized so that you can compare different rates. And that's also true at the next level and the next level and so on and so forth. But that's only one input in determining the height of the discount rate. There is another one which is an outside influence, because these bills are very liquid. You can arbitrage between them. If a bill has a higher rate than another one, suppose there is the wool chain and there is a cotton chain. Okay, we are talking about the cotton chain here, but it competes with the wool chain, where it is a very similar structure. But if it so happens that the discount rate is higher in the wool chain, then holders of bills will sell the lower paying bill, or they don't even go near that because they know they can get a better rate in the other market. So in other words, this market will be starved of funds input, and this will be the favored type of bill until the situation equalizes itself when the discount rate will be the same. So in other words, there is a discount rate at large, which depends not just on the wool chain and the cotton chain, but also the iron chain and the chain of the wheat, how it becomes bread ultimately, and all the other consumer goods in great demand. The deviation between the discount rates in these chains cannot be very great. In fact, it tends to be smaller and smaller. Why? Because these chains of bill circulation are not isolated chains or pipes, but they are interchangeable. So there is also a circulation of bills between the different chains, and the effect is equalizing the discount rate. So a change in the discount rate, which can originate somewhere for some reason, will very quickly spread all over and will bring about a similar change in all the other chains of circulation. So the discount rate is actually a signaling system. And if you want to see the importance of this, then you have to think of the sovereign consumer. And ultimately, a change in the discount rate reflects a change in the propensity to consume. If the discount rate is rising, it means propensity to consume falls, and vice versa. This relationship is definitely an inverted relationship. So any change in the discount rate originates ultimately from the consumer. Now, whether it's consuming food or consuming clothes or consuming something else is something we cannot say for sure. It can originate anywhere, but it will spread very quickly all over the trading system, and the adjustment in the discount rate, if not instantaneous, at least it'll be very quick, in a matter of hours or days at most. The discount rate will be adjusting the same way in all the other markets. So it's a signaling system. It sends the message to the marginal shopkeepers, but also producers at various levels, that the sovereign consumer has reined in his demand. higher discount rate. And you should make, as a marginal shopkeeper or as a marginal producer or whatever, make an adjustment accordingly. And they will. Because if they don't, then they lose their profit potential. And through this signaling system, the productive facilities of society and the distributing facilities of society will reach a very high level of efficiency, an ideally high level of efficiency, which without the discount rate and this instantaneous messaging, signaling, it wouldn't be possible. And I already mentioned that there are lots of differences between the interest rate and the discount rate. This is one of them. First of all, the discount rate should be pretty well constant, and it is under the gold standard. Certainly constant enough, sufficiently constant, to eliminate bond speculation. And if there are changes, they will be slow and minor. And that's quite in contrast with the change in the discount rate. It changes independently, these two rates. One can move up, the other can move down, or vice versa. They could also move in the same direction. But there is almost complete independence between the movements, because the sources of the interest sources of discount are quite different. In particular, I'm now examining you. What's the source of credit when it comes to saving? It's the saving, and the source is consumption in the bill market. The bond market, savings, bill market, consumption. And they both have their typical type of financing, typical type of credit. The bill in the case of consumption, and the bond in the case of savings. So this is the full story now. We have examined a rather complex situation where we considered the consumption goods approaching the ultimate consumer, and the marginal productivity of social circulating capital, which shows you the possibility of expanding or contracting, and also changing the composition. Very important on the one hand. On the other hand, there's a paper. This was physical goods, consumer goods. But there is a mirror image of that in the paper trading market, and these are the bills, the maturing bills, which circulate, change hands. They do a lot of useful work in financing some production at the very last stage of the semi-finished good becoming a finished good and a consumer good, ultimately when it is in the hands of the margin of the shopkeeper. And any change in one will have a reflection in a change in the other, both ways. So the physical market handling the consumer goods in the highest demand, which are moving very fast to the consumer. On the other hand, the circulating bills, and changes may originate here, or changes may originate there, but they will have an almost instantaneous repercussion in the mirror image in the other market. So this is then the story. I may have some more to say about that tomorrow, because there is there are 4 lectures devoted to this. One was yesterday, the real bills of Adam Smith. And then this morning we talked about social circulating capital and its marginal productivity. That was this morning. And now I'm talking about the arbitrage between consumer goods and the market, consumer goods market on the one hand, the bill market on the other. And there is a 4th and even a 5th topic here, which we will discuss tomorrow. Part of it I have already started, the formation of the discount rate, and certainly the marginal shopkeeper. I have talked enough about that. But this goes into, this blossoms into the theory of retail trade. And that is coming tomorrow. I just want to check with Peter that, no, Rudy, right? Peter has done his job, okay? And Rudy is still coming up. Your topic is?
The critique of the quantity theory of money and as how that pertains to the...
And are you ready for tomorrow afternoon?
Well, I thought I was doing it Thursday. I thought I was doing it the day after?
The day after. So I'll come up, I'll fill the gap tomorrow and assume that Rudy will. And that's just one lecture?
2 lectures.
2 lectures, okay. And then we are approaching the end, but we'll tie up the loose ends, and I hope you will feel satisfied when we come to the last lecture. Now, I think we could start a discussion now, because I don't want to go further here. So what we have discussed so far, real bills, social circulating capital, marginal item, marginal shopkeeper, discount rate, changes in discount rate, any of these, the floor is open for discussion.
Okay. Questions? Peter?
Perhaps I'm running ahead of Rudy's expose tomorrow. Perhaps you could also expand on why newly mined gold that hits the market will hit the bill market and drive down the discount rate instead of being inflationary. I think that would fit in nicely, unless really is treatment.
Yeah, this is coming. I plan to talk about that. But this is very important, that why I take so much time to explain the bill market, bill trading, consumer goods is precisely because I want to prove a rather general theorem that the quantity of gold in circulation is not going to change prices. If a lot of gold enters circulation, what will change is the discount rate. But I come to that. So in other words, gold is the best monetary commodity. If you try to use some other commodity for that purpose, you will find that you run into difficulties. But gold is an integral part of this circulation. Bills maturing into gold, and then through the labor market, gold is paid out in wages, and then the consumer buys the goods, and there is a circulation rather similar to the circulation of water in the ecology. that water gets evaporated through the sunshine, and clouds are being formed, and then there's precipitation, rainfall, and then the water does its good job in agriculture, and then the rivers collect it, empty in the ocean, and then the cycle starts again. Something very similar is happening in the economy, where gold plays the same role as water does in the ecology. So we come to that, but I do appreciate your question, because it's very, very relevant to this discussion of ours. But I don't want to start this new topic just now. Let's see if there are questions about those things which we have already discussed. Yes?
Professor, could you review the very origin of the discount rate? Why is there such a thing at all before it gets, into this complex arrangement? Just the historic origin of the discount rate.
Gold standard?
The historic origin of the discount rate.
Oh, historic origin. Okay. Yes. Originally, bills arose because of a very common situation having to do with moving value over space. And I could say that the bill market is a reflection on moving value over space, whereas the bond market is more like moving value over time. So you have to imagine two countries probably separated by big water, okay? And there are merchants and producers in each. And the surplus in one country is in high demand in the other, and vice versa. So there is a very useful exchange of goods. But it never ever happens that the same value is shipped in one direction, exactly the same in the other, so they cancel out. Usually there are differences, and these differences have to be settled in cash, which means in gold. Now, the way this happens is that there are banks also, or quasi-banks, certainly people who accept papers, because the merchants do trust one another in this country and in the other. They know that they act in good faith, and nobody tries to be outsmarting the other or defraud him of his well-earned returns. And therefore, when goods move, paper moves in the opposite direction. This short-dated bill, 90-day bill. And then those who have payments to make in one country couldn't do better than just using that paper for that purpose of payment, because the exporter in this country gets bills, and the same here, and when time comes to pay, well, you try to send the paper back, which is much cheaper than sending another consignment of goods, with which you would take your chances whether it has a ready market or not. So in other words, paying for imports is the main source of demand for bills. Because if you are an importer, say in this country, and time has come for you to pay, then you could buy the bills circulating here of merchants in the other country. You buy that and send it back. And only in case there is a deficit, a definite deficit in the trade accounts of one country, when gold has to be shipped. But the history is that this really was a very rare occasion when gold had to be shipped in payment for goods, which are consumer goods in high demand. And this is a fact. You can go back and study the records of the Bank of England and see why it was that the Bank of England could finance world trade globally in the 19th century and early 20th century on a very, very tiny gold reserve. It's really surprising. Even Keynesians find it a miracle that so little gold was needed to run the world trade, which is a fact. You can go to the records, it's in public domain, and check. And today it would be even smaller amount of gold relative to the volume of trade, because we have a very much more sophisticated telecommunication system. Instantaneous transfer of cash is possible, which wasn't, because much of the 19th century had to do without telegraph and wireless radio communication and the rest of it. But today even money can be sent instantaneously from one corner of the globe to another. So it is this need of paying bills in a foreign country which gave rise to and lent importance to the bill market, trying to eliminate shipping gold from one place to another. And now the discount rate is a necessary part of the adjustment mechanism, because it keeps the demand always at a very high level, demand for bills. The supply of bills is always there. And if there is any need for adjustment, the discount rate takes care of that. So this is what I would say in explanation of the evolution of the bill market. It might have started out as a local affair, as we have seen it in the wool chain and the cotton chain, spinner, weaver, and cloth merchant, which is strictly a local affair in the same area. These people actually know each other in person, and they are friends. They meet frequently over a glass of beer. They discuss their common problems and how to improve their trading system. But very soon it became global, and the bill market covered the whole entire globe. And that was possible because of the qualities of gold payment. It's completely unmatched, unrivaled. No other financing matches gold financing, but the beauty of it is that gold either doesn't have to move physically at all, or if it has to, it's just a very minimal amount which takes care of the various imbalances. Now we have a discussion period coming up. The question is, would you rather have it now and then we call it a day, or would you rather have your half-hour coffee break now and come back for the discussion afterwards?
Well, let's keep going.
Keep going?
Keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
Keep going. Keep going.
So then we finish early today, and if you want to go sightseeing or something, today is the day. Unless the rain or the storm comes, which will not be helpful. Yes?
That's a wonderful story about how the bills became used globally.
Isn't it? It's really one of the very nice stories in economics. The dry subject, but you can visualize it as a drama, as if it was played in a theater. Yeah.
But I still don't get how the discount rate operated in that. How? Because Rudy's question to you was about the history of the discount rate. About the history of the discount rate. How it arose in the first instance.
The discount rate.
The discount rate.
Okay.
So in that context, how did...
All right. You are right. I haven't hit on that. So let's talk about this a little bit. How the discount rate appeared and how the changes of discount rate became important and necessary. The historical aspect. So let's start with the chain of wool trading, with the wool merchant and the spinner, the weaver, the cloth merchant. It goes smoothly enough as far as that is concerned until some extraordinary event takes place. And this extraordinary event could be that the weaver has a loom, and this loom breaks down and it's beyond repair. And he has to have a new loom in a hurry. That's everybody's interest, because if one link in the chain is broken, then the chain is pretty useless, isn't it? You've got to fix that broken link. So all the other traders in the same chain will agree with the weaver that it's absolutely necessary to have the new loom available as soon as possible so they can keep producing. Any delay will punish every other merchant in the same chain. So let's assume that the weaver has a pile of bills, maturing bills, and he wants to raise the cash to go to the loom maker to pay for a new loom. It should be delivered immediately, installed, and then production can start again. So he goes to the spinner, offers his bill, goes to the cloth merchant, and they all say, well, I would really love to help you and take the bills off your hands and give you the gold coins, which you will then have to take to the loom maker to buy the new loom. But unfortunately, I haven't got the gold coins, so they couldn't help him. So at that point, the weaver is pretty desperate, but what else can he do? He will go to the loom maker next town and takes a chance. Perhaps the loom maker will take the bills. He doesn't know for sure, but what can he lose? He will try. And as it turns out, the loom maker might just like the idea, because he might have the gold coins which he is storing because he has a new extension to his factory, say, but his bill is not due yet. It will be due in a month's time. So in the meantime, he doesn't mind to carry maturing bills, which means a little additional income for him. And then the trade is made. He provides the loom to the weaver, who can start weaving right away, and then he will in due course make the payment, and perhaps even the stonemason will accept the bills if they haven't matured in the meantime, in payment for the work he has done on the loom factory. So you see, this is what's behind the very high liquidity of these. But now we have to visualize the situation that these bills have so much time to run to maturity. So everybody agrees there has to be a discount. Nobody will pay face value because they haven't matured yet. So everybody knows that there will be a discount. But just how much this discount should be, that's the question. And if we answer that question, then we answered Rudy's question and Louis' question, because that's exactly the point which we have to now decide. What determines the actual discount rate at which the loom maker's bill in his portfolio, which he was going to collect later, but now he needs immediate cash to buy the loom. So there are willing people. The only thing is that they have to agree on a mutually acceptable discount rate. So what is going to determine that discount rate? Well, my approach to this is that the discount rate which they will find mutually acceptable, the weaver and the loom maker or whoever else is willing to give him the gold coins now for a bill which is not going to mature for another month or two, it depends on the propensity to consume. You see? Because if the propensity to consume happens to be low, then the fellow who is willing to take this would say, well, my risk is really greater. In a brisk market, when the propensity of consume is high, propensity to consume is high, there is little risk in taking your paper, because you know that the next consumer is coming along and taking your merchandise, and you have the cash flow to meet your payments. But if the propensity to consume is low, then the risk could be much higher. And therefore you say, well, I have to cover my risk. I take the paper because I like the idea of collecting the discount rate, but it will have to be higher, I'm sorry to say, because I'm running a greater risk. And it's not your fault, it's not my fault, it's the sovereign consumer. the crown on the wall, sovereign consumer. So this is the only basis for consensus. If all these participants in the bill market want to come up with a consensual rate, then it has to be governed by the sovereign consumer, the propensity to consume. And that is in full harmony with everything I have said earlier, that the propensity to consume and the marginal productivity of social circulating capital are in inverse relationship. So that's the answer I can give to your question. I actually, when you expressed your admiration for the story, and I expressed my own inner satisfaction with having a little hand in developing that story, I put this down in a form of a story, and actually I gave the title, "The Second Greatest Story Ever Told." It's the second because the greatest story is, of course, the Bible. But let's be modest. The second. And this is on the internet, and you can find it. I can't give you verse and chapter, but it's not difficult to find it. I have a website, and I go to Popular Economics, and when I wrote it, it was made part of one of these courses, which I did not give in live like this one.
DVD about the course, which was there's a DVD about the course that you.
That's on DVD. Oh, good. So can you give reference?
It is the third, number third of the DVD.
So in that second greatest story ever told, there was a movie, the greatest story ever told. So I just borrowed the title of that movie, making it the second greatest story. And I would welcome anybody who would like to make an actual movie.
Perhaps the title is Adam Smith, Adam Smith.
Oh, they will find it. I'm sure if you're interested, you will. It's not difficult to
But
find.
they cannot see what it is until they purchase the DVD.
So
The
in
theory of Adam Smith and its relevance today, I think, is the fact of it.
in this second greatest story ever told, I write as it were. What's the name for the script for a movie?
Scenario?
Scenario for a
Script.
movie.
It's script.
Script. Okay. And I visualize, I think it's in terms of the cotton chain. There is the cotton merchant and then the spinner and the weaver. And
Originally the miller and the baker and
yeah. And the loom breaks down, that's all there, and then he offers his bills, everybody wants to help, but ultimately has to go to the next town. And then there is a similar story for the wheat trade, the miller and the baker, and so I think you will like it. It's written for its entertainment value as much as its theoretical value, and actually it goes on to cover the discount house, which I talked about this morning, and the acceptance house, and how the conspiracy failed, the conspiracy between the miller and the baker, who withheld the wheat in their storage facilities because they were speculating on a higher wheat price due to the weather, inclement weather resulting in...
It's God saying, he wrote the best story.
So I do recommend that, I don't think I can promise to print it out and distribute it. But there's no problem because it's on the internet and you don't even have to carry the paper when you go home, just find it. We can give the exact reference to this. And I think this is the best explanation I can give you for the fact that the height of the discount rate is determined by the propensity to consume, because that is the guiding principle for the various traders who might buy your bill before it matures. This is what they think of. How my cash flow is going to work. What risk am I taking if I buy this particular bill? So that's how it works. And that's the best answer I can give you.
It's a very good answer.
Yes.
It's a very good answer. It makes a lot of sense.
I'm sure if you read the second greatest story ever told, you will like it, and you will understand all the... You haven't read it?
No, I haven't.
Oh, wow! You have something coming to
It is
you.
not written. It is not written, I think.
It is certainly.
It is not written, I think. It is on the DVD.
No, it's written.
I think it's on the internet.
Okay,
That's my memory. That's my memory. You have the DVD? You did.
It is on your web page. It can be ordered on your web page.
It's not available yet?
Martin. Yes, it is. It is.
It's already available. We have copies of that?
I'm not sure.
No. Well, anyhow, if you want the DVD, that's available from Martha Schoon. Does everybody have her?
I have the DVD, I'll watch it. I haven't watched it yet.
Now, just as well that we have an early finish because we don't know what risk we are taking if we continue. Further questions?
Short add-on question perhaps to this, and I think you touched this already. So the alternative gold standard where this real bill market is not as sophisticated, what are the problems that arise, and what are the problems that did arise historically, actually, the main problems?
What are the problems if there is no real bills market? Okay.
In this gold standard.
What problems will arise, Professor, if you have...
Is this the 100% gold standard?
Well, I think so, yeah. Yeah, basically.
Yeah, well, they call it the so-called 100% gold standard, but that's a complete misnomer. And the greatest advocate of the so-called 100% gold standard was Murray Rothbard, who is dead now. He was a very colorful figure, and I knew him in person and I liked him, but I think he went completely wrong on that idea. He was a great advocate of the return to gold standard, but he said it had to be 100% in the sense that the banks had to carry 100% gold reserve, no other asset. But if you have to run a banking system, the banks will have to have some kind of income. I mean, nobody will run a bank on charity for you, and if they did, that I wouldn't trust that bank. So that it was never clear to me and actually Mises said much the same, but in different words. And Mises was more careful. When the spirit took him, he would just make outrageous statement and would leave it there. But Mises was much more careful. But basically, he also said the same thing, that a bank must carry 100% gold reserve, and it should cover its own expenses by charging fees for various services. Every little service would be subject to a fee. So each check would have to have a charge made to the account holder, or if you took the elevator from the first to the second floor, you would have to put in a coin, and that's the way he wanted to run the bank. I didn't think it was very practical to run a bank like that. The bank should have some assets which are earning assets, but obviously have to be the safest type of assets, so it's your job of finding what these safest assets are. But Mises said all assets are basically the same. He did not believe in the bill market, as I explained it earlier, and therefore he thought that bills are subject to the same kind of fluctuation as bonds are. There it is, 100% gold standard. Now, 100% gold standard would not fly. We might as well agree on that right here and now. And it would not fly because of the very great flexibility that is needed in trade. Trade is definitely seasonal, and it's not just the Christmas shopping and the dry season in January after Christmas when trade volume contracts. There are all kinds of other very important fluctuations